Value Added 201, Deepening and Applying Your Understanding. Take a few moments to read the learning goals of this video, which is Chapter 1 of our lesson. We will begin by reviewing some basic concepts from previous videos. As you recall from the oak tree analogy, we explored 3 different measures: achievement, simple growth, and value added. We also explored student growth in comparison to measures of effective gardeners. Starting with achievement, we will look at the height of the trees to determine the most effective gardener. Since Gardener B's trees were taller, we determined from achievement measures that Gardener B was the more effective gardener. Then we moved to the concept of simple growth, measuring the gain of the trees over a 1-year growth period. Since Gardener B's tree gained more height, our measures still infer that Gardener B is the more effective gardener. Last, we explored value added by measuring the average growth of all trees in the area to establish a growth prediction. Then we controlled for environmental factors that affect the growth of trees and adjusted the prediction for an apples-to-apples comparison of the effect of the gardeners on the growth of their trees. By looking at the actual growth minus predicted growth, we could measure the effect each gardener had on the growth of trees in his care. With this measure, we saw that Gardener A was more effective at growing trees. This is essentially what value added is. Value added measures the effectiveness and contribution of schools and teachers on the learning of students. These are the control variables that are considered in PPS, value-added reports. These variables help to isolate the teacher's contribution to student growth in achievement. The value-added model uses statistical techniques to separate the impact of schooling from other factors that may influence growth. These are measurable student characteristics which are associated with meaningful differences in student outcomes, but outside of the teacher's control. It is important to note that controlling for demographic characteristics does not mean lowering expectations for any grouping of students addressed by the control variables. The figures you see are conceptual interpretations of using predictions on an individual student basis. In this example, on the top of the screen, these students have outperformed their predicted results. We call that a positive value-added result, or a result above the district average. In the example on the bottom, these students have underperformed against prediction. This value-added result would be below the district average. Keep in mind that value-added predictions are not reported for individual students, but for the effect of learning on groups of students. It is important that you deepen your understanding of using prior tests as predictors. In order for tests to be used in a value-added model, they must be reliable. They have to be highly correlated to the curriculum, and they have to have stretch at the high and low ends of the spectrum. In PPS, 2 prior tests are used for predictability for each test reported. For example, both prior reading and math are used to predict 4th grade reading. Both prior math and reading are used to predict math. However, math can also be predictive of reading, and vice versa. By using more than one test, the estimate is more stable. Mathematical calculations are made to determine the predictability of prior tests to the tests being analyzed. Most tests have some relationship to each other, but Mathematica uses those tests that have the highest relationship and do contribute the most. Since fourth grade science is the first time science is tested in Pittsburgh Public Schools, there are no prior science tests. So let's look at what might be predictive of science. Looking at these reading scores, what guesses can you make about the performance of these students in science? You may have said that Valerie has a strong chance of doing well in science. Anne will probably struggle, and Tom will more than likely have average performance in science. Okay, now we will add math scores. How does that increase the predictability? Of course, prior test prediction is not random guessing. Mathematica uses what actually contributes the most. Of course, reading 2010 to reading 2010 in a one-to-one correlation is the highest. Reading 2010 to reading 2011 is also a high predictor of reading. But prior math, science, and social studies tests also have predictive power to reading post-tests. The correlations in this chart do not represent PPS. They are simply conceptual. As you can see, some tests have a higher correlation or predictability than others. The prior test must be predictive of the post-test for any value-added model. This allows us to control for different student starting points. Here we see that Science 2010 is not a high correlation to Math 2011, only 0.44. But Science 2010 is a good predictor of science in 2011, 0.85. You would expect this. Math 2010 is also a good predictor of science, 2011, 0.74. And we find that reading 2010 is also a good predictor of science in 2011, 0.72. Therefore, it makes sense to use reading and math as predictors. Can you speculate what prior tests can be used for geometry? What about when geometry is taken in sequence? Your answers will vary, but more than likely you answered something math-related. In fact, in PPS, 8th grade math and CBA Algebra 1 are used as predictors of geometry. The sequence does matter because it may determine what prior tests are available. What might be used as predictors for physics? All three could be predictors, but most likely math and science will have a higher relationship to physics. In PPS, there are several PSSA tests, CBAs, and PSAT tests that are non-contiguous for which value-added estimates will be provided. These are the prior tests used to predict value added in grades K through 5. Beginning in 2012, we will be adding value added results for grade 3 math and reading. These are the prior tests used to predict performance in grades 6 through 8 in Pittsburgh Public Schools. These are the prior tests used to predict performance in grades 9 and 10. And these are the prior tests used to predict performance in grades 11 and 12 in PPS. Please take a few moments to reflect on your learning by considering the prompts you see on the slide. This concludes this module on deepening and applying your value-added knowledge. In the next video installment, Chapter 2 of Value-Added Measures 201 Part A, you will be learning from samples of your own value-added reports to help grow your understanding. If you have any questions in the meantime, please contact the help desk with any questions about value added. There is a dedicated team of staff at PPS intent on quickly and accurately answering your questions.